Now, question number 2. It says, Sovereignty Limited makes a single product. A production level of 7,500 units has the following costs. A production level of 7,500 units has the following cost. So the costs that are listed there are the cost of producing 7,500 units of this product. They need materials, 200 meters of material, fabric, and the cost per meter is 12.5. They need to work for 4,500 hours, and the rate per hour is 10, and the total overheads is 300,000. I'll complete the table below to show the total cost per unit at a production level of 7,500 units, observing the overheads over the number of units produced. Enter your answers to 2 decimal places. I told you when you are answering this question, what the question is asking you is to calculate the total cost per unit when the level of production is at 7,500 units. So for you to answer this question, you must first calculate the total cost of producing the 7,500 units, and then you divide by 7,500 for you to get a cost per unit for all of them, for materials, labor, and overheads. Okay, so I'm gonna work this one on this Excel sheet, and I'll start with, if we had the total cost, then I'll calculate the cost per unit. Remember, this is the total cost of producing 7,500 units. So I'll start with material cost, then labor cost. The material cost here, they needed 2,000 meters, and the cost per meter is 12.5. Okay. So the total cost here is the quantity, the 2,000 meters, multiplied by the cost per meter, which is 12.5. So what you get here is 25,000 pounds to produce 7,500 units in terms of material. In terms of labor, you have 4,500 hours, and the rate per hour is 10. So the total labor cost there would be 45,000. And next one, the next thing that you have here is direct cost. Now remember, material and labor are direct cost. So the direct cost here is material cost plus the labor cost, which is these two added together. So you get a direct cost of 70,000. Then you have the amount here for the overheads. These overheads here, that's what the question is asking you. The overheads here is a fixed cost. So to produce 7,500 units, you need 300,000. But this is what basically comes here. That's the 300,000. Then you have the total cost. Then you have the total cost right here. So the total cost here will be the direct cost plus the overheads. These two added together. Okay. Now, so the cost per unit here, in terms of material, remember the number of units being produced are 7,500 units. So you need 25,000 in terms of material to produce 7,500 units. You need 45,000 to produce the same 7,500 units. And you need 300,000 to produce the same 7,500 units. So the cost per unit here basically would be the total cost divided by the number of units. So in other words, for material, the total cost of 25,000 divided by the 7,500. You get the cost per unit for material. Same thing for labor. The 4,500, 45,000 I mean, divided by 7,500. You get 6. And the direct cost here is either you add these two or you get the 70,000 divided by 7,500. Okay. Then the overheads is the same thing. The 300,000 divided by the 7,500. You get 40. Now the total cost per unit here is either the direct cost of 9.3 plus 40, or you simply say 370,000 divided by 7,500. It's still okay. We still get the same answer. Okay. So I believe this is clear. So the answers that we are looking for in this question, remember the question says enter your answers to 2 decimal places. So the material cost here is this 3.33. So we will have 3.33 here. The labor cost is 6.00. So we'll have 6.00 here. The direct cost is 9.33. The 3.33 plus 6, that is 9.33. Then the overheads here is what we've calculated at 40. Then you have the total cost per unit, the 9 plus 40. This would be 49.33. Okay. Very good. That's part A of this question. Part B of the question says, Serenity Limited are considering what the product cost would become if they used an alternative overhead absorption method to units. Now remember, the overhead absorption method that they have used here is the number of units, which is the 7,500 units. Now when it comes to the basis of absorption, mostly at this level, at the level that you are doing in principles of costing, you'll only see 3. You say that the units, or the labor hours, or the machine hours. Okay, so they are saying, the question is telling you here, they want to change it from the basis from units, the number of units produced, to the alternative. Serenity are considering what the product cost would become if they used an alternative overhead absorption method to units. They want to change. Now the question is asking you, complete the following statements. The current method of overhead absorption rate used is based on. That's what the question already said. Alternative overhead absorption methods to units. They are currently using production units. So if you see from the pick list here, they are using the number of units. The next one says an appropriate alternative basis for the company would be what? Now remember, I've told you there are 3. We say that the number of units, the labor hours, or the machine hours. So let's see. In this company, we have, apart from units, we have only labor. We don't have machine hours. So the alternative here would be labor hours. That would be the alternative. The alternative here would be labor hours. Then the question says this would mean the overheads would be divided by. Now remember, overhead absorption rate is the budgeted overheads divided by the number of units if you are using the units as the basis, divide by the number of hours if you are using the labor hours as the basis, or divide by the machine hours if you are using machine hours as the basis. Now, so the question is asking you here, this would mean the overheads would be divided by, so if we change it from the number of units to labor hours, we would now divide it by the number of hours, which according to this question here, the labor hours that have been worked, or that they are supposed to work, is 4,500. So you will divide this by 4,500. Yes, we actually have it from the pick list, correct? This would result in overheads. This would result in overhead cost per unit. The overhead cost per unit. Now, you need to be watchful in this one here. So first of all, you have to calculate the overhead absorption rate per, you need to calculate overhead absorption rate per hour. The overhead absorption rate per hour is the budgeted number of overheads divided by the budgeted hours. The budgeted overheads is 300,000 and the number of hours is 4,500. So this would be 300,000 divided by 4,500 hours. What you would get here is what you'd get here is 66.6 66.67. This is 66.67 pounds per hour. Okay, but you see what the question is asking you is this would result in overhead cost per unit. Overhead cost per unit. So for you to get the overhead cost per unit, this would be, you need the number of hours, per unit, then you multiply this by the overhead absorption rate. Divided by the overhead absorption rate per hour. So the number of units to produce, the number of hours to produce one unit. You need 4,500 hours to produce 7,500 units. So the number of hours per unit is 4,500 hours divided by 7,500 units. So what you need is 0.6 hours and this was 66.7 pounds per hour. Okay, so we'll come back to this one now. The overhead cost per unit. Overhead cost per unit would now be the number of hours per unit, which is 0.60 multiplied by the overhead absorption rate per hour, which is 66.67. And the answer that you get there would be this one times this one. What you'd get here is 40, which is the same as this. So that's the answer here. That is 40. This would result in overheads cost per unit of 40. Okay. Good.